I was halfway down the elevator when my phone buzzed. Meeting canceled. Client emergency. Head home. I stood in the lobby of the Meridian Group building on Michigan Avenue, briefcase in one hand, cab app already open in the other. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. On any other Tuesday, I would have stayed at my desk until 7, reviewing Q4 projections, answering emails, nursing cold coffee. But the Hartwell presentation had been the only thing keeping me tethered to my chair that day, so I went home. Our brownstone in Lincoln Park is a narrow 3-story with original crown molding and a back gate that opens onto the alley. My husband had bought it 2 years before we met and called it his proudest achievement. More than any design award, more than any completed project, he'd say, running his palm along the plaster walls. This house is who I am. I used to find that beautiful. The cab dropped me at the corner of Belden at 2:23. I paid, stepped out, and took the side path around to the back door out of habit. There's a squeaky board just inside the front entryway, and my husband worked from home on Tuesdays. I didn't want to interrupt whatever call he was on. That small, ordinary instinct, the same one I'd had 100 times before, saved my life. I pushed the back door open and set my bag on the kitchen counter without making a sound. That's when I heard him. Not the clipped vocabulary of a site review, not the low hum of a conference line. His voice was different, softer, deliberate, and cold in a way I had never heard before. We do this right and nobody asks a single question. She's been hiding the allergy for 2 years. One bad reaction, no EpiPen close enough to reach, and her heart stops before the ambulance gets there. My husband was in his study, door cracked open 2 inches. He was on speaker, and the voice on the other end turned my blood to something I didn't recognize. "You're sure she won't have any on her?" That voice was my brother's. "She always keeps one in her purse. I know exactly where she puts it." I didn't move. I pressed my back flat against the kitchen wall and listened. My husband continued, businesslike now, almost bored. "Her purse gets switched at the restaurant. Kevin handles the seating. She won't suspect anything from her own brother." A pause. "Saturday night. Reservations already confirmed. After that, everything comes to me. The house, the accounts, the life insurance. And you get what you were owed before she kept it from you." My brother's voice came back quieter. "It needs to look clean, Daniel. No loose ends." And my husband, the man who had kissed me goodbye at 7 that morning, said, "It'll look exactly like what it is." A tragic allergic reaction happens to people all the time. I walked back out the way I came. No screaming, no confronting. I walked until I was 3 blocks away, standing outside a coffee shop on Armitage with my hand gripping a parking meter because my legs had stopped cooperating, and I stayed there until my breathing evened out. I want to tell you about the allergy because you need to understand what they were planning to use against me. 2 years ago in the spring, I collapsed at a birthday dinner and woke up in the ICU at Northwestern Memorial with a tube in my throat and an allergist explaining that I had experienced a grade 4 anaphylactic response to peanut proteins in a dish I hadn't even known contained them. Severe hypersensitivity, the kind where your throat closes before your brain has time to register what's happening. 2 nights in the hospital, an auto-injector prescription in triplicate, strict instructions. And I told no one, not my colleagues, not my friends, not my husband, not my brother Kevin. My mother was the only person who knew, and my mother died 8 months after the diagnosis. After that, I carried the secret alone. I carried 2 EpiPens in a slim case disguised as a makeup pouch, and I called it managing my situation. What I was really doing was protecting an image, the version of myself that nobody had to worry about. The version that didn't have a body that could be shut down by a bowl of takeout. I had spent my whole life being the capable one, the reliable one, the sister who had a career and a house and a 401k. I wasn't going to become the person who needed accommodating, so I said nothing. And somewhere in the past 2 years, my husband found out, and instead of coming to me, instead of asking why I'd hidden it, he opened a file drawer and saw an opportunity. Daniel and I met in the fall 3 years ago at a mutual friend's dinner party in Roscoe Village. He was an architect, tall and composed, the kind of man who listens when you talk and asks follow-up questions that make you feel genuinely seen. On our second date, he drove me along the lakefront and pointed out buildings he'd worked on, explaining what choices he'd made structurally and why. I told him I'd grown up watching my father run a small construction business, that I could read a blueprint before I could read a chapter book. He'd looked at me like I was the most interesting thing he'd encountered in years. I believed that look completely. I believed all of it. When he proposed at the rooftop bar of the Langham Hotel on my birthday, with the Chicago skyline spread out behind him like something arranged for the occasion, I said yes before he finished the question. I thought I had found the one person in the world who matched my pace. I didn't understand yet that he was cataloging everything I had. Standing outside that coffee shop, I try to think like the person I am at work. I'm a senior financial analyst. I spend my days mapping risk, identifying structural weaknesses, finding the place where a plan will fail under pressure. I needed to think about Daniel's plan the same way. He knew about the allergy. He'd compromised my EpiPens, or he planned to. He'd recruited my brother with a story about money I had allegedly taken from Kevin, and he'd chosen a restaurant, a controlled environment for Saturday, 4 days away. I was not going to walk into a precinct with an overheard conversation and expect to be believed. I needed him to say it again. Somewhere I could capture it. I booked a hotel room that evening under an alias from my work account. I paid cash. I called my mother's estate attorney, Ellen Marsh, from the room and asked her one question. Had there been any other versions of my mother's will besides the final executed document? She paused for exactly long enough to confirm what I suspected. Your mother had been working on an amendment, Ellen said carefully. She intended to establish a supplemental trust for Kevin. She passed before the revision was executed, so only the original will stands, which left everything to me. Kevin had never known about the amendment. Someone had shown it to him. Someone had taken a draft document from my mother's file and used it to convince my brother that I had deliberately let the revision lapse to keep the estate for myself. That was the story Daniel had given Kevin to buy his cooperation. It wasn't a plan built on hatred. It was built on math and resentment and a carefully curated lie. On Thursday morning, I texted my husband that I'd been feeling unwell and staying with a friend. He responded in seconds. Of course, babe. Rest up. I'll be here when you're ready. The warmth of a man performing concern for a woman he expected to be dead by Saturday. I came home at noon. He was upstairs. I found my purse in the entryway closet, exactly where I kept it, slightly out of place. I opened the EpiPen case inside and pressed the test caps on both injectors. No pressure, no resistance. Both had been compromised, the mechanisms disabled, the auto-injection spring neutralized. They looked identical to intact units. You would have to test them to know. I stood in the kitchen holding them and understood that he had done this carefully, thoughtfully, the same way he approached every project. He'd studied failure thresholds. He prepared for every contingency except one, me coming home early. I replaced both injectors in the case with 2 lip glosses of roughly the same weight. Left the purse exactly as I'd found it. Went to the bathroom, verified the backup EpiPen I kept in my toiletry bag was untouched, and put it in my coat pocket. Then I left. Dr. Tarp. Anaya Patel, my allergist at Northwestern, saw me same day. I told her everything in the examination room with the door shut. She listened without interrupting, her hands still on the table in front of her, and when I finished, she said, "We need documentation now." Her assistant photographed both compromised injectors and logged their lot numbers. She filed an incident report with the pharmacy board as a case of suspected tampered medication. Then she wrote an emergency referral to Northwestern's Allergy and Immunology Unit for monitoring, which put me inside the hospital under medical supervision from Thursday evening through Saturday afternoon. Safe, documented, unreachable. I told the nursing staff to restrict my room to medical personnel only and asked to be connected to the Chicago Police Department's Violent Crimes Unit. Detective Carla Simmons arrived Friday morning with a recorder and reading glasses on a lanyard, and the particular stillness of someone who has heard a lot of things over a long career and chooses carefully which ones to act on quickly. I walked her through the timeline, the overheard conversation, the compromised EpiPens now at the forensic lab, the will draft I believed Daniel had used to manipulate Kevin, the Saturday reservation I had no intention of keeping. When I finished, she said, "Illinois one-party consent. You were present in the house. You were party to the space where the conversation occurred." I said yes. She said, "Play it for me." I played her 41 seconds of my husband's voice, recorded on my phone while I stood pressed against the kitchen wall with my hand over my mouth. Daniel's voice, clear and deliberate. One bad reaction, no EpiPen close enough to reach, and her heart stops before the ambulance gets there. Detective Simmons looked at the recorder on the table. Then she looked at me. She said, "Stay in the hospital until you hear from me directly. Do not contact your husband. Do not contact your brother." She left with the audio file forwarded to her department email and the forensic lab intake number for the injectors in her notebook. Saturday came. I was still in room 42012 watching the clock move past 7. The time of the reservation. My phone was on silent. 22 missed calls from Daniel between 6:15 and 8:47. I read each notification without answering. At 8:47, Detective Simmons texted me 2 words, "We have him." What she told me later in pieces across several conversations is this. The restaurant had been cooperating with her team since Friday afternoon. The reservation under my name had been flagged. A dietary note had been added to my reservation specifying a peanut allergy, but the note had been added not to protect me from peanut exposure the way an actual allergy note would be, but to ensure the kitchen would be aware of which dish to prepare for my table. A specific dish, requested through the restaurant's online system at an IP address traced to a design server registered to my husband's firm. The kitchen manager was a cooperating witness. When Daniel arrived at 7 with his mother and my brother and requested the corner booth and asked the server to confirm the peanut content of the dish specifically, the manager had flagged it. Not allergy awareness, confirmation. They'd wanted to be sure it was in there. My brother had left the table at 7:40 claiming discomfort and gone to the parking structure. He'd tried to reach Daniel 4 times in 20 minutes. He was detained in the parking structure at 9004, 12 feet from his car, and by 9:50 he was in an interview room answering questions. Kevin talked for 50 minutes. He'd been approached by Daniel 8 months ago, shown a photograph of my mother's letter, the partial draft, the amendment that was never signed. Daniel told him I had known about it, that I had stalled the signing, that I had let it lapse deliberately. None of that was true. Kevin had believed it because the story explained the gap between our lives that he'd been carrying for years, the gap that had nothing to do with a will and everything to do with the random machinery of how 2 kids from the same house can end up living in completely different worlds. He told Detective Simmons he thought it was only supposed to make me sick, not kill me. He said he hadn't known the EpiPens had been disabled. He was crying when he said that. I know because she told me. I still don't know exactly where the truth is and what my brother believed about all of it. But I know he sat in that room and told everything he knew, and that the information he gave was what closed the gaps in the prosecution's case before Daniel's attorney could seal them. There's something Detective Simmons told me weeks later after Daniel had been charged and Kevin had entered his plea agreement and the case was moving through the system with the particular slow weight of criminal proceedings. She told me about a document recovered from Daniel's home office during the search warrant execution. A draft on his personal laptop, saved in a folder titled with only a date 2 years in the future. It outlined a second financial strategy, a phase he hadn't reached yet. Kevin was in it. Not as an accomplice, as a liability. The document described a scenario in which Kevin, over time, would become a problem, a loose end with knowledge of the first plan and a documented role in it. The solution Daniel had written out was what you'd expect from someone who had already decided that people in his way were structural problems to be solved. Kevin had no idea. He'd agreed to help my husband kill me, believing they were partners, believing there was money waiting on the other side, believing someone had finally offered him justice for something that had never been a theft in the first place. He had no idea that in Daniel's actual plan, he was phase 2. That thought lives in me in a complicated place. My brother agreed to participate in my death. He also had no idea he was next. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I'm still figuring out what to do with them together. The trial lasted 8 days. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Guilty on all 6 counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, temping with a medical device, wire fraud, the recording from the kitchen, the compromised EpiPens with Daniel's fingerprints on the spring casing, the restaurant access logs, the draft document from his laptop. His attorney filed a motion to suppress the recording on the grounds of invasion of privacy. The motion was denied. I had been present. I was party to the space. One-party consent. Illinois allows it. Daniel received a sentence of life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He'll be in his 60s before a board ever hears his name. Kevin pleaded guilty to conspiracy to cause bodily harm, not the felony murder charge the prosecution initially sought. His attorney made the argument that he had genuinely not understood the plan was lethal. The judge reduced the charge, but not the weight she placed on the act itself. 4 years. Eligible for parole in 26 months. At his sentencing, he looked at me once across the courtroom. I held his gaze and then I let it go. It wasn't absolution. It was just me deciding not to look away from something true. I sold the brownstone the spring after the verdict. A young couple bought it in 11 days. I stood on the sidewalk the morning of the final walkthrough and looked at the back gate, the one I'd come through on a Tuesday at 2:23, and I stayed there for about 2 minutes. I thought about how many times I had taken that path, how many ordinary afternoons, how many times my husband had been in that study and I had been careful not to disturb him. Then I walked to my car and did not look back. I live in a 1-bedroom in Wicker Park now. 2 deadbolts, a building code I change every quarter. Dr. Patel is still my allergist. I wear a medical alert bracelet every day, the kind I used to refuse on principle, the kind I used to tell myself I didn't need, because needing it meant admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. I carry 2 EpiPens again, both verified, both registered in a pharmacy system that lobs batch numbers and flags irregularities. I've told my current colleagues about the allergy. I've told the restaurants I go to regularly. I've told the people I'm close to. It feels different than I expected it to feel. Not smaller, not bigger. Just present, like a fact about myself that belongs to me instead of a secret someone else gets to use. Kevin wrote me a letter from the correctional facility in November. I have read it 4 times. He doesn't ask to be forgiven. He describes, carefully and with what sounds like genuine reckoning, the specific morning of the dinner when he had a thought that something was wrong and went anyway. He describes it the way you describe a decision you are going to spend years understanding. I believe that part. My therapist says I'll know when I'm ready to write back. I think she's right. There's something I need to say about the 2 years I spent hiding the allergy from everyone around me. I told myself I was protecting my privacy. What I was actually protecting was a story I needed to be true about myself. The story where I didn't have a body with a fault line, where no one had to look at me and adjust. I was afraid that if people knew, they would treat me differently, and I would become the version of myself I had always feared being. What I didn't understand is that secrets that shape don't protect you. They become the architecture of something someone else can study and learn to use. Daniel found my medical records in the same filing cabinet where I kept my mother's estate papers. He didn't find them because I was careless. He found them because I had spent 2 years teaching myself that hiding was safer than saying the true thing. I was wrong. The hiding built the trap. The telling, late and forced and terrifying as it was, put me in a hospital room with a doctor and a detective rather than in a restaurant with a purse full of EpiPens that had been turned into props. I am 32 years old. I am a financial analyst in Chicago. I left work early on a Tuesday because a meeting was canceled, walked through a back gate instead of a front door, and heard 30 seconds of a conversation that was never meant for my ears. I am alive because I chose in that moment not to make a sound, because I walked back out and thought instead of reacting, because I eventually told the truth about a diagnosis I had been carrying alone for 2 years, because I put a working EpiPen in my coat pocket before I left the house for the last time. None of that was heroic. All of it was just careful. Sometimes careful is enough. I wear the bracelet now. I tell people the true things. I sleep with the deadbolt turned, and I run on the lakefront path twice a week within the limits my doctors gave me. And some mornings I drive past Lincoln Park and feel nothing, and some mornings I take a different route entirely, and both are fine. My therapist calls it living in the truth of what happened without being required to live inside it permanently. I am learning the difference between the two. It takes longer than you think it will. It takes exactly as long as it needs to. And every morning I get up and choose again to still be here. That choice is mine. It was always mine. And no one, no matter how carefully they build the architecture of your end, can take that from you.